In 1987, a 72-year-old black woman walked into the office of one of America's wealthiest men. She carried nothing but a small envelope and a lifetime of pain. What she revealed that day would expose a truth so devastating it would bring a billionaire to his knees and change an entire family's legacy forever. But this isn't just another story about injustice. This is about a woman who chose love over revenge, forgiveness over bitterness, and how one moment of courage can heal generations of wounds. What Ruby Mae Johnson showed that Billionaire will restore your faith in the power of the human heart. Meet Ruby Mae Johnson. Born in 1915 in rural Alabama, she spent her entire life cleaning houses for wealthy white families. At age 25, she was hired by the prestigious Thornfield family, one of the richest dynasties in America, built on textile manufacturing and real estate that stretched across 3 states. Ruby Mae wasn't just their housekeeper. She was their confidant, their children's second mother, their family's beating heart. She arrived at dawn and left after dinner, 6 days a week for 40 years. She cooked their meals, tended their wounds when they fell off bicycles, helped with homework, and listened to teenage heartbreaks. The Thornfield children, James Jr., Margaret, and little Tommy, called her Mama Ruby. She called them her babies. When they were sick, they wanted Ruby Mae, not their own mother. When they needed comfort, they ran to her arms. Ruby Mae earned just $25 a week in the 1940s, barely enough to support her own 3 children back in her small apartment across town. But she never complained. She poured her love into that grand mansion as if it were her own home, as if those children were her own blood. For decades, the Thornfield patriarch, James Sr., watched this devoted woman sacrifice everything for his family. He saw her work through fevers, skip meals to feed his children first, and mend their clothes with the same care she'd give her own. And slowly, something beautiful began to bloom in that house, a love that transcended the ugly barriers of that era. James Sr. began to see Ruby Mae not as hired help, but as family. He increased her wages secretly, paid for her children's school supplies, and even helped when her youngest needed medical care. But there was something else growing, something neither of them dared speak aloud in 1940s Alabama. Over the years, James Sr. and Ruby Mae developed a deep, quiet love. Not just respect, not just friendship, but a profound connection of souls. They never acted on it. The world they lived in made that impossible. But they both knew. In stolen glances across the kitchen, in gentle touches when passing dishes, in the way he'd linger to talk after dinner while his wife was upstairs. And then in 1950, the impossible happened. Ruby Mae became pregnant. The scandal would have destroyed both their lives. James Sr. was married to a prominent socialite, a pillar of Birmingham society. Ruby Mae was a black domestic worker. In 1950s Alabama, their love could have meant death for both of them. So they made a heartbreaking decision. Ruby Mae would disappear for several months, claiming to visit sick family in Georgia. She would have the baby in secret, far from prying eyes. James Sr. would arrange for the child to be adopted by a loving family up north, where he could have a chance at a better life. The baby was born on a cold February morning in 1951. Ruby Mae held her son, their son, for just 3 hours. She memorized his tiny fingers, his perfect nose, the way he gripped her thumb with surprising strength. Then she kissed his forehead and whispered a promise. "Mama will find you someday, baby. Mama will find you." James Sr. arranged everything through a private lawyer. The baby was placed with a wonderful family in Detroit, a black middle-class couple who couldn't have children of their own. They named him David. The adoption was sealed, the records buried. It was as if the child had never existed. Ruby Mae returned to the Thornfield house and never spoke of those months again. But something had changed in her eyes. James Sr. saw it. His wife, Eleanor, noticed that Ruby Mae seemed sadder, more distant. The other children sensed something different about their beloved Mama Ruby. Years passed. Ruby Mae watched James Jr., Margaret, and Tommy grow up, graduate college, get married, have children of their own. She loved them fiercely, but there was always a hollow ache in her chest, a piece of her heart that lived somewhere in Detroit with a boy she'd never know. James Sr. aged into a powerful, wealthy man. His business empire grew. He became one of the richest men in the South, but success couldn't fill the emptiness he felt. Every year on February 15th, he'd slip away to church and light a candle for the son he'd never held. In 1983, James Sr. died of a heart attack. At his funeral, Ruby Mae stood in the back of the packed cathedral, tears streaming down her face. She was mourning more than just her employer. She was grieving the only man she'd ever truly loved, and the father of the child she'd lost. But James Jr., who had inherited his father's empire, barely acknowledged her presence. The new generation of Thornfield saw Ruby Mae differently. To them, she was just the old housekeeper, a relic from their father's time. Within 6 months, they let her go. "We're modernizing," James Jr. told her coldly. "We don't need live-in help anymore." After 40 years of devoted service, Ruby Mae was dismissed with a small pension and a cold handshake. For 4 years, Ruby Mae lived quietly in a tiny apartment, surviving on Social Security and her meager pension. She spent her days reading, gardening, and thinking about the son she'd given up. She wondered if he was happy, if he had a good life, if he ever thought about the mother who'd loved him enough to let him go. Then, in 1987, everything changed. Ruby Mae was watching the evening news when she saw him. A successful businessman from Detroit was being interviewed about his new foundation to help underprivileged children. His name was David Washington. He was 36 years old. He had kind eyes and his father's strong jaw. Ruby Mae's heart stopped. She knew. Somehow, in the depth of her mother's soul, she knew this was her boy. It took her months to gather the courage and money for a bus ticket to Detroit. She'd saved every penny from her grocery money, walking miles to avoid bus fare, eating beans and rice for weeks. She had to see him. She had to know for sure. She arrived at David's office on a rainy Tuesday morning, clutching a manila envelope that contained her most precious possessions: the hospital bracelet from the day he was born, a tiny baby photo the nurse had secretly taken, and a letter she'd written to him every year on his birthday, but never sent. The receptionist almost turned her away. "Mr. Washington doesn't see anyone without an appointment." But something in Ruby Mae's eyes, a desperate, pure love, made the young woman reconsider. David was busy reviewing financial reports when his secretary buzzed in. "Sir, there's an elderly woman here," she says. "She says she's your mother." "Your birth mother." The world stopped. David had always known he was adopted. His adoptive parents, the Washingtons, had been wonderful. They'd loved him completely and given him every opportunity. But he'd always wondered about the woman who'd carried him, who'd made the ultimate sacrifice to give him a better life. Ruby Mae was led into his office. For a long moment, they just stared at each other. Then she opened the envelope with shaking hands and showed him the hospital bracelet with his birth date, the tiny photo and the first letter she'd written to him 36 years ago. "Happy first birthday, my sweet boy," she read aloud, her voice trembling. "Mama thinks about you every single day. I pray you're happy and loved. I pray you understand that giving you away was the hardest thing I ever did, but I wanted you to have chances I could never give you." David broke down. This woman, this beautiful, weathered, loving woman, was his mother. The mother who'd sacrificed everything so he could have the life he'd built. But Ruby Mae wasn't finished. Through her tears, she told him about his real father, about James Thornfield Sr., about the love affair that could have killed them both, about the empire that was partially built by his father's hands. "Your daddy was a good man," she whispered. "He loved you before you were even born. He wanted to keep you so badly, but we both knew. We knew you deserved better than what we could give you in that world." What happened next shocked everyone. David didn't just embrace his mother, he decided to confront his half-brothers. Armed with DNA evidence and legal documents Ruby Mae had secretly kept, he walked into James Jr.'s office. The meeting was explosive. James Jr. initially denied everything, called Ruby Mae a liar, threatened lawsuits, but the evidence was undeniable. David was James Thornfield Sr.'s son. He was their half-brother. And according to the will they'd never seen, a secret codicil their father had written but never filed, David was entitled to a portion of the family fortune. But David didn't want money. He wanted something more powerful, recognition of Ruby Mae's sacrifice and his father's love. Standing in that boardroom, this successful black man looked at his white half-brothers and made a choice that would echo through generations. "I don't want your inheritance," he said quietly. But I want you to know who Ruby Mae Johnson really is. She's not just your old housekeeper. She's the woman who loved your father with her whole heart and gave up her son so he could have a better life. She's the woman who raised you, who loved you, who gave 40 years of her life to your family. The transformation was immediate. Margaret, the sister, began crying first. Tommy, the youngest brother, remembered all the times Ruby Mae had comforted him as a child. Even James Jr., the hardest of them all, felt his walls crumbling as memories flooded back. They realized they had thrown away the most loving person in their family's history. They had discarded the woman who'd been their second mother, the woman who'd sacrificed her own son for their father's honor. Within a week, the Thornfield family tracked down Ruby Mae. They didn't just apologize, they made her whole. They bought her a beautiful house, established a trust fund for her care, and most importantly, they welcomed her back as family. But the real magic happened between David and Ruby Mae. After 36 years apart, mother and son were finally reunited. David moved his mother to Detroit, where she spent her remaining years surrounded by the grandchildren she'd never dreamed she'd meet. Ruby Mae lived 8 more precious years, long enough to see David's children graduate college, long enough to dance at their weddings, long enough to hold her great-grandchildren. She died peacefully in 1995, surrounded by love, finally whole after a lifetime of broken pieces. The Thornfield family established the Ruby Mae Johnson Foundation, dedicated to helping domestic workers and supporting single mothers. They understood, finally, that their wealth meant nothing compared to the love this one woman had given them. David never took a penny from the Thornfield fortune. He didn't need to. His mother's love had already made him the richest man in the world. Today, when people ask David Washington about the secret to his success, he pulls out a faded photograph of a young black woman in a simple dress, holding a tiny baby. "My mama taught me," he says, "that love is the only inheritance that really matters. Everything else is just temporary. But love lasts forever." Ruby Mae Johnson showed that billionaire family what true wealth looks like. It's not measured in dollars or real estate or corporate empires. It's measured in sacrifice, in forgiveness, in the courage to love when love seems impossible. Her story reminds us that the most powerful people in the world aren't always the ones with the most money. Sometimes they're the ones with the biggest hearts. Sometimes they're the ones who choose love over bitterness, hope over despair, and family over everything else. Ruby Mae's legacy lives on in every act of unconditional love, every sacrifice made for family, every moment when we choose forgiveness over revenge. She showed us that one person's courage to love can heal generations of wounds and change the world, one heart at a time.